I gave 8 years of my life and 3 Michelin stars to my wife's family restaurants. Then I heard those fatal words from her lips. We don't need people like you anymore. They thought firing me was the end. They had no idea it was just the beginning of their nightmare. Turns out the contract I signed years ago wasn't just paper. It was a ticking time bomb. My name is Ethan Blackwood. I'm 42 years old. And until last week, I was the executive chef and culinary director of Harrington Fine Dining, Chicago's most prestigious restaurant group. I gave that company 8 years of my life, transformed their mediocre establishments into Michelin star destinations, and married the boss's daughter thinking we were building something that would last. I'd been up until 3 a.m. finalizing the menu for our newest location, a waterfront spot that the critics were already buzzing about. My coffee was still hot when Sophia asked me to join her and Victoria in the main office. I walked in with a stack of sample menus, excited to show them my concepts. Victoria sat at the head of the table, my father-in-law Richard's old spot, with Sophia beside her, both in matching charcoal suits, looking more like strangers than the women I'd known for nearly a decade. Ethan, Victoria's voice cut through the silence, sharp as my chef's knife. We're restructuring. We don't need people like you weighing us down anymore. I looked at Sophia, waiting for her to say something, anything. Her eyes stayed fixed on her perfectly manicured nails, tapping lightly against the mahogany table. People like me? I asked, my voice steady despite the sucker punch to my gut. You mean the chef who brought you 3 Michelin stars? Victoria's smile tightened. We're taking Harrington in a new direction. More innovative, less old-fashioned. I turned to Sophia again. 8 years of marriage, and she couldn't even look me in the eye. Anything to add? I asked her directly. She finally glanced up, her face a mask I'd never seen before. It's business, Ethan. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. 8 years of my life, my recipes, my reputation, nothing personal. I didn't argue, didn't shout, just nodded once, gathered my dignity, and walked out. The drive home was a blur. Our penthouse, technically hers, paid for by Harrington money, felt cold and empty when I stepped inside. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon and stared out at the Chicago skyline, the restaurants I'd built glittering like stars in the distance. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel, our financial director. Heard what happened. They didn't read your contract, did they? I frowned. My contract? I hadn't thought about it since Richard made me sign it years ago when we expanded to our 3rd location. Little did they know, that contract would be their undoing. That night, I barely slept. Daniel's text about my contract kept replaying in my mind like a half-remembered recipe. By dawn, I was digging through my home office, searching for paperwork I hadn't thought about in years. I found it in a folder marked Expansion 2019, yellowed at the edges but still intact. Richard had insisted I sign it the night we celebrated our 3rd restaurant's opening. Just a formality, he'd said, clapping me on the back and calling me the son he never had. My eyes scanned the legal text, stopping suddenly at Section 12. There it was in black and white. Ethan Blackwood to maintain exclusive creative authority over all Harrington Fine Dining recipes, techniques, and culinary intellectual property, including retroactive works. I gripped the paper tighter, my chef's hand steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. Every signature dish, every technique I perfected, every recipe I created, legally mine. The restaurants could keep their names, but their souls, their menus, belonged to me. The phone rang, startling me. Richard Harrington's name flashed across the screen. What the hell is going on? His voice boomed through the speaker. None of the frailty his daughters claimed had forced his early retirement. They fired you? Without consulting me? Afraid so. I replied calmly, the contract still warm in my hand. Victoria called it restructuring. He cursed, a string of colorful kitchen language we'd shared over countless late nights. Those girls have no idea what they've done. Did they even look at your contract? I don't think so, I said, feeling the first smile since yesterday creep across my face. Son, they can't run those restaurants without your recipes. That contract is ironclad. I made sure of it. After we hung up, I poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped onto the balcony. Below, Chicago was waking up, people hurrying to jobs where loyalty still meant something. My phone buzzed again. Daniel, asking to meet. At our usual coffee shop, Daniel slid into the booth, his expression grim, but his eyes bright with something like admiration. They didn't just shoot themselves in the foot, he said, voice low. They blew off the whole damn leg. Every signature dish, every special, every technique. They can't legally use any of it without your approval. Can they fight it? I asked, stir my coffee. They'll try, Daniel snorted. Victoria's already called in some hotshot lawyer from New York. But Richard knew what he was doing with that clause. It's airtight. I nodded, my mind spinning with possibilities. The power had shifted, but I wouldn't rush. This wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. What's your move? Daniel asked. I looked out the window at the flagship Harrington restaurant across the street, already prepping for lunch service. Without my recipes, they had nothing. I'm going to let them figure it out, I said finally. Sometimes the best lessons come from hunger. Daniel grinned, raising his cup in a mock toast. To teaching the Harringtons what happens when they bite the hand that fed them, literally. For the first time since walking out of that office, I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten. They wanted me gone, but they were about to discover just how essential I truly was. 3 days of silence. My phone lit up with calls and texts from Sophia, Victoria, and their new corporate chef, all of which I ignored. The ball was in my court now, and timing was everything in both cooking and revenge. I sat at my home bar, nursing a glass of whiskey when Greta, Richard's longtime assistant, called. It's a madhouse, Ethan, she said, her voice hushed. The Northside location couldn't serve half their menu last night. Customers walked out. The downtown spot is serving dishes that taste nothing like yours. People are leaving one-star reviews everywhere. Sounds rough, I replied, feeling a grim satisfaction warm my chest. Victoria's screaming at everyone. They brought in some kid from a fusion place to replicate your recipes. He's failing miserably. She paused. Your bourbon-glazed lamb. He tried to fake it with store-bought sauce. Richard would have a stroke if he saw it. And Sophia? I asked despite myself. Playing peacemaker, but she's sweating. Big investors are asking questions. The Peterson wedding reception. They're threatening to cancel without your menu. The Peterson reception. $500,000. Booked a year in advance, specifically because the bride loved my seasonal tasting menu. After hanging up, I grabbed my chef's jacket, the one with my name embroidered over the heart, and ran my fingers over the stitching. 8 years building their empire. 8 years creating dishes that people booked months in advance to taste. My phone buzzed again. A text from Sophia. We need to talk. Please. I set the phone down without responding. Let her stew a little longer. Every chef knows the importance of proper marination time. The next morning, I drove downtown, parking across from the flagship restaurant. Through the windows, I watched the staff scrambling to prepare for lunch service, their movements frantic and disorganized. The sous chef I'd trained for years stood at the pass, looking lost without my guidance. A text from Daniel pinged. Health inspector just left. Gave them citations for improper food handling. Their new guy doesn't know your systems. I smiled, tucking my phone away. I hadn't called a health inspector, didn't need to. Quality control had always been my domain, and without me, the standard were already slipping. Victoria emerged from the restaurant, phone pressed to her ear, her face tight with stress. She didn't notice me watching from across the street. I started my car, driving away with the windows down, breathing in the spring air. I hadn't felt this free in years. They thought they owned me, but they'd forgotten who really created the magic that kept their restaurants full. A week into my silent treatment, the dam finally broke. Victoria's carefully crafted email arrived first. Formal, cold, requesting a discussion of transitional intellectual property arrangements. Sophia's text followed minutes later. Please, Ethan. The restaurants are suffering. Can we meet? I let another day pass before responding to Sophia only. The Violet Room. Tomorrow. Noon. The Violet Room was neutral territory, not a Harrington restaurant, but an upscale competitor where the chef, Marcus, was an old friend from culinary school. I arrived early, allowing Marcus to seat me at the best table, where I could watch the door. Sophia arrived precisely at noon, immaculately dressed as always, but with shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Ethan, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Thank you for meeting. I nodded, saying nothing. Let her make the first real move. Things have been challenging, she began, unfolding her napkin. There are some complications with the recipes. Complications, I repeated, taking a sip of water. The new chef is struggling to maintain the standard our customers expect. She leaned forward. We need your recipes, Ethan. We can arrange appropriate compensation. I set my glass down carefully. Appropriate compensation. Like firing me in front of the entire management team. Sophia had the grace to look uncomfortable. That wasn't my idea. Victoria pushed for it, and I didn't stop her. I should have. But you didn't, I said evenly. Our food arrived. Marcus had prepared his signature dishes for both of us without taking our order. A chef's courtesy to a fellow professional. We can work something out, Sophia pressed. Name your price. I took a bite, savoring the perfect balance of flavors. It's not about money, Sophia. It's about respect, loyalty, things you and Victoria seem to have forgotten. It was business, she insisted, barely touching her food. Nothing personal. I laughed then, genuinely amused. Firing your husband is always personal. And now, so is my response. What do you want? She asked, frustration finally cracking her polished veneer. I want you to understand exactly what you threw away, I replied, standing up. Enjoy your lunch. Marcus is brilliant, almost as good as I am. I walked out, leaving her sitting there, her untouched meal growing cold. The day after my lunch with Sophia, I decided to show my hand. Not to her, not to Victoria, but to everyone who mattered in the Chicago restaurant scene. I drafted a meticulously worded notice and sent it to every supplier, vendor, and industry contact in my considerable network. As per Section 12 of my executive contract with Harrington Fine Dining, I hereby exercise my exclusive rights over all culinary intellectual property created during my tenure. Until further notice, no recipes, techniques, or presentation methods I developed may be commercially reproduced. I copied the Restaurant Guild, the Culinary Institute, and, for good measure, the food critic of the Chicago Tribune. Then I sat back and waited for the aftershocks. They came faster than even I expected. By evening, my phone was lighting up with calls from suppliers confused about pending orders. We can't send these specialty ingredients without your authorization, chef, said Louise, my truffle supplier. Your notice was very clear. The premium meat vendor called next, then the custom ceramic plate manufacturer. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They respected me, valued our relationship, and wouldn't cross the line I'd drawn. Daniel called around 9, barely containing his excitement. It's nuclear meltdown over there, Ethan. Victoria threw a plate at the wall when legal confirmed your notice was binding. The Times critic canceled his reservation when he heard you weren't behind the menu. I poured myself a scotch, feeling the weight that had pressed on my chest since the firing finally beginning to lift. And the Peterson wedding? Canceled. They want you, not the Harrington name. They're asking if you'd consider catering it independently. That was unexpected. I hadn't considered operating without the Harrington infrastructure, but the idea planted itself firmly in my mind. What if I could build something of my own, something based on respect rather than family politics? My doorbell rang the next morning at 7 a.m. I opened it to find Greta standing there, looking both nervous and determined. Richard sent me, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He wants to meet. Tonight, at his house. Is this Victoria's idea? I asked, following her into my kitchen. Greta snorted. Victoria doesn't know. Neither does Sophia. This is Richard taking back control of the mess they've made. I considered refusing, but curiosity won out. Richard had built Harrington Fine Dining from a single neighborhood bistro into a culinary empire. Even in retirement, his opinion carried weight. Tell him I'll be there at 8, I said, turning to make coffee. Would you like a cup? Greta smiled for the first time. I knew you were the reasonable one. Unlike those girls. She shook her head sadly. They've forgotten what built this business. Richard hasn't. After she left, I called Daniel. Keep your ears open, I told him. Something's happening tonight. Whatever it is, he replied. You've got the upper hand. Half the staff is ready to walk out if you start something new. Including me. I hung up, staring out at the Chicago skyline. Maybe this wasn't just about revenge anymore. Maybe it was about building something better from the ashes of what had burned down. Richard's lakeside mansion was lit up against the evening darkness when I arrived. His longtime housekeeper, Maria, greeted me with a warm embrace. He's in the library, she whispered. The girls have been calling all day. He's not taking their calls. I made my way through the familiar house to the wood-paneled library where Richard Harrington had taught me about wine pairings and business ethics in equal measure. He stood by the fireplace, looking older but no less formidable. There's the man of the hour, he said, raising his glass. The chef who brought my daughters to their knees without even turning on an oven. I accepted the offer bourbon. Not what I intended, Richard, but exactly what they needed. He gestured to the chairs by the fire. I've called an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. sharp. I want you there. I'm not part of the company anymore, I reminded him. Victoria made that very clear. But you control every dish that made us famous. He leaned forward. I'm proposing a restructuring. You, as executive culinary director with full autonomy. Victoria, removed from operations entirely. Sophia stays as CEO, but with clear boundaries. I took a slow sip, letting the bourbon warm my throat. Why would I come back? Because you built those restaurants as much as anyone named Harrington, he replied simply. And because you're not the kind of man who walks away from his creations. He had me there. The board is split, Richard continued. Half want you back at any cost. Half think Victoria and Sophia can lawyer their way out of this. Tomorrow, we settle it once and for all. I nodded slowly. I'll be there, but on my terms, not as a returning employee begging for his job back. I wouldn't expect anything less. He refilled our glasses. Their faces when they see the contract you signed, that I made bulletproof specifically for this scenario, will be worth every penny of my lawyer's fees. I raised an eyebrow. You planned for this. I planned for everything, including my daughters forgetting that talent, not bloodlines, built our success. He raised his glass. To tomorrow. To tomorrow, I echoed, clinking my glass against his. Driving home, I called Daniel. Board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Be ready. For what? He asked. For the next chapter, I replied, watching Chicago's skyline glitter before me like the future I was about to reshape. The boardroom of Harrington Fine Dining felt different this time. Instead of being ambushed, I arrived as the power player, dressed in my finest suit rather than Chef White's. Richard sat at the head of the table, with board members filling both sides. A space remained conspicuously empty beside him. I took my position at the opposite end, Daniel on my right. Victoria and Sophia entered last, both faltering visibly when they saw me. Victoria's eyes narrowed to slits, while Sophia's face flushed with something between shame and surprise. Now that we're all here, Richard began, his voice commanding immediate silence. Let's address the collapse of our operations since Chef Blackwood's departure. Victoria leaned forward. Temporary adjustments. Catastrophic failure. Richard cut her off, sliding financial reports across the table. Reservations down 60%. 3 canceled events. Social media flooded with complaints about menu quality. The Peterson wedding, a $500,000 event, now wants Ethan independently. The board members exchanged concerned glances as Richard continued. We're bleeding talent too. 6 staff members have resigned, including our sommelier and 2 sous chefs, all asking to be notified when Ethan establishes his next venture. I remained silent, watching Victoria's composure fracture while Sophia stared at the table. The contract is clear, Richard continued, signaling to his lawyer, who distributed copies to everyone. Section 12 grants Ethan exclusive rights to his culinary creations. Without him, we're serving empty plates. We can fight this, Victoria insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. The corporate lawyer, not the one she'd hired, cleared his throat. We've examined every angle. The clause is ironclad. Chef Blackwood controls the intellectual property that defines our brand. Richard turned to me. Ethan, you've been quiet. What are your terms? Every eye in the room pivoted to me. This was the moment I'd contemplated since walking out of this same room in humiliation. I could destroy them if I wanted. Instead, I chose strategic reconstruction. I'll return as executive culinary director, I said calmly, with complete creative control and a 30% ownership stake in the company. Victoria's gasp was audible. Ownership had always been restricted to Harringtons. Additionally, I continued, I'll oversee all hiring and firing in the kitchen. No staff changes without my approval. I looked directly at Victoria, and I want her removed from operations entirely. The room fell silent. Richard nodded slowly. Fair terms. You can't be serious, Victoria hissed. Completely serious, Richard replied. Your impulsive decision has nearly destroyed what took decades to build. You're lucky Ethan's willing to salvage it at all. A board member spoke up. I moved to approve Chef Blackwood's terms. Hands rose around the table. The vote was quick and decisive. 9 in favor, 2 opposed. Victoria and her closest ally. Motion carried, Richard announced. Ethan, welcome back. Victoria, you're reassigned to non-operational roles, effective immediately. I looked at Sophia, who hadn't spoken a word. Her eyes finally met mine, acknowledging the seismic shift in our power dynamic. This wasn't just about professional control. It was a fundamental restructuring of our marriage, too. As the meeting adjourned, Daniel whispered, Masterfully played, Chef. I nodded, watching Victoria storm out while Sophia lingered uncertainly. First order of business, I told Daniel. Rehire everyone who left and restore the original menus. We have a Peterson wedding to save. The weight of victory settled on my shoulders. Not the bitter satisfaction I'd expected, but something more substantial. I hadn't just reclaimed my place. I transformed it into something stronger. The transition back was surprisingly seamless. The kitchen staff cheered when I walked through the door of the flagship restaurant the next morning. Javier, my head sous chef who'd been about to quit, actually hugged me. Never thought I'd see you back, Chef, he said, eyes suspiciously damp. Place hasn't been the same. I clapped him on the shoulder. Let's get to work. We've got a lot to fix. And fix we did. Within days, we'd restored the original menus, reconnected with suppliers, and begun repairs to relationships with regular customers. The first weekend service under my return saw the dining room fully booked, the kitchen humming with the controlled precision I'd established over years. Victoria kept her distance, relegated to marketing functions where she couldn't interfere with operations. Richard made occasional appearances, watching with quiet satisfaction as the restaurants regained their footing. Sophia was the wild card. Our personal relationship remained in limbo, but professionally, she stepped back and let me run the culinary side without interference. She focused on the business operations, and we established a cool but effective working relationship. 2 weeks after my return, I found her in the office late, reviewing financial reports. First numbers since your return, she said, turning the screen toward me. Revenue up 40% already. I nodded, unsurprised. People come for consistency and excellence. We're delivering again. She hesitated, then closed her laptop. I owe you an apology, Ethan. A real one, not just for the business impact. I leaned against the doorframe, neither entering fully nor leaving. I'm listening. I should have stood up to Victoria. Should have stopped her from pushing you out. Her voice grew quieter. I chose family loyalty over our marriage, and I was wrong. I studied her face, searching for the calculation I'd grown to expect, but found only genuine regret. The restaurant group is stabilizing, I said carefully. Our marriage is a separate question. I know. She looked down at her wedding ring. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness, just a chance, eventually, to rebuild what I damaged. I didn't answer right away. The hurt was still raw, but the vindictive anger had cooled. Time will tell, I said finally. Right now, I'm focused on the Peterson wedding next month. It's back on the books. She nodded, understanding this was all I could offer now. Walking out to my car later, I felt strangely at peace. The restaurants were thriving again under my direction. My position was stronger than ever. And as for Sophia, that story wasn't finished, but I'd write the next chapters on my terms. Daniel called as I pulled out of the parking lot. The new investors are confirmed for next week. They're excited to meet the culinary genius behind Harrington's resurrection. I smiled to myself. Tell them I'm just getting started. 6 months after my return transformed Harrington Fine Dining, I stood in the kitchen of our flagship restaurant, watching my team execute a flawless dinner service. The energy was electric, the dishes perfect, the dining room packed with satisfied customers. This wasn't just a recovery, it was a renaissance. Daniel appeared at my side, financial reports in hand. 3rd consecutive record-breaking month, he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. Profits up 35% over our previous best year. I nodded, tasting a sauce before it left the pass. Make sure the staff bonuses reflect that. They earned it. The restaurant group had evolved dramatically under my leadership. My 30% ownership stake gave me the authority to implement changes I'd advocated for years: better staff wages, sustainable sourcing, an apprenticeship program for underprivileged youth. The Harrington name remained, but the soul of the place was now undeniably mine. Victoria had eventually resigned rather than accept her diminished role, selling her shares to Richard, who held them in trust for potential future grandchildren. Her departure removed the last source of active resistance to my vision. After service ended, I found Sophia waiting in my office, a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses on the desk. "The Peterson wedding final payment cleared," she said, pouring the champagne. Mrs. Peterson called personally to say it was the highlight of her daughter's life. I accepted the glass, but remained standing. Our professional relationship had stabilized, but the personal side remained complicated. We lived separately now. I'd moved into a downtown loft that better suited my schedule and offered the space I needed to rethink our relationship. "I've been offered a television deal," I told her, watching her reaction carefully. "National cooking show, cookbook line, the works." Her eyes widened. "That's incredible, Ethan. Congratulations." "It would put Harrington in the national spotlight," I continued. "But it would mean restructuring our personal arrangement too." She set her glass down, suddenly still. "What kind of restructuring?" "I need to know where we stand, Sophia. Really stand. Not as business partners, but as husband and wife." I leaned against the desk. "I've given you 6 months of space to figure that out." She looked up, meeting my gaze directly for perhaps the first time since my return. "I want our marriage back, Ethan. I made that clear. But I understand if that's not possible anymore." "It's not about possibility," I said quietly. "It's about trust. Can I trust you to choose me over your family when it matters?" She stood, closing the distance between us. "I've learned my lesson the hardest way possible. If you give me another chance, I swear I'll never make that mistake again." I studied her face, searching for any hint of calculation or manipulation. Instead, I found only openness and regret. "One step at a time," I said finally. "Move back in. Let's see if we can rebuild what was broken." She smiled, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I'll take it, one day at a time." As we clinked glasses, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. The revenge I'd sought had transformed into something more valuable, strength I hadn't known I possessed. Whether Sophia and I ultimately succeeded or failed, I would never again surrender my power to anyone. 1 year to the day after Victoria and Sophia had attempted to fire me, I stood at the podium accepting the James Beard Award for Outstanding Restaurateur. The irony wasn't lost on me, or on the industry that had watched my saga unfold with fascinated attention. "This award belongs to my entire team," I said in the microphone, scanning the audience where Daniel, Javier, and the rest of my staff sat beaming. "And to those who believed in me, even when circumstances tested that belief." My gaze found Sophia in the front row, elegantly dressed and smiling with genuine pride. Our reconciliation had progressed slowly but steadily over recent months. Trust rebuilt itself in small moments. Her unwavering support of my television show, her willingness to sign the new prenuptial agreement that protected my intellectual property, her patience when work kept me late. Richard sat beside her, looking older but satisfied. He caught my eye and gave a subtle nod of approval. We developed a different relationship this past year. Not father and son-in-law, but equals with mutual respect. After the ceremony, we hosted a celebration at the flagship restaurant. The champagne flowed freely as industry peers, staff, and friends mingled in the space that had become a culinary landmark under my direction. "Chef," Richard approached, lowering his voice. "Victoria called today. First time in months." I raised an eyebrow, waiting. "She's starting a small cafe in Boston," he continued. Asked if I'd heard how things were going here. He smiled wryly. I told her to look at the national restaurant rankings. I nodded, feeling no malice toward her now. Maybe she'll learn something about building rather than taking. Later, as the party wound down, I found myself alone in the kitchen, my sanctuary. Sophia found me there, her heels clicking on the tile floor. "Planning tomorrow's menu already?" she asked, sliding her arms around my waist from behind. I turned to face her, thinking about how much has changed in a year. "For the better," she said, her eyes holding mine. I nearly lost everything that matters because I forgot what was really important. I kissed her gently. We both learned valuable lessons. Harrington Fine Dining had expanded to 7 locations across the Midwest. My television show had been renewed for a second season. The cookbook was hitting shelves next month. But most importantly, I discovered my own worth, not as Sophia's husband or Richard's protege, but as Ethan Blackwood, a chef who had built something lasting through talent and determination. Daniel appeared at the kitchen entrance. "Car's ready whenever you are, chef. Early start tomorrow with the Today Show interview." I nodded. "We'll be right there." Taking Sophia's hand, I walked through the restaurant that now truly belonged to me. Not because of my name on the ownership papers, but because every dish, every detail, every success flowed from the passion they tried to dismiss. "Ready for whatever comes next?" Sophia asked as we stepped into the cool Chicago night. I smiled, feeling the weight of my keys, my knife roll, my future in my hands. "More than ready. This is just the first course."